If you're not moving forward in life, you're moving backwards. This is Ace and Jamie, and this is Breakpoint Podcast.
Our goal is to create and deliver content that evokes a change of spirit and heart, seeking out messages that will relate and inspire.
Stories and experiences of people and their breakpoint in life.
Little rough around the edges, completely unhinged, and wildly compassionate.
We bring you Breakpoint Podcast.
How'd you end up working for Gary Vee, man? Why don't we just jump right into that time frame?
Well, so it was 2013 when I first met Gary. I was working at a place called Group M at an agency called M80, also doing some time at Mindshare. And I was working on the Jaguar North America business. And I was in the middle of a Super Bowl push for them. And Gary's brother-in-law, Alex, reached out to me and wanted to chat with me a little bit. So I, at the time, M80, the agency I was working with, was getting ready to be acquired by another search company within the Group M enterprise. And I wasn't really big into that acquisition. And I also was just, I'd been there for 4 or 5 years, and I was, kind of interested at looking at what my options out there were. And when Gary, was interested in me, they were at an interesting point in their kind of existence. VaynerMedia was. They were about 4 or 5 years old, and they were looking to take the next step and bring on some senior leaders to really scale out their efforts. And so I think I checked some boxes for Gary that, weren't readily available out there in the market. I was senior. I could be in a room with a chief marketing officer or a CEO. And I had a lot of social media experience, which those kind of combination of forces wasn't all that, prevalent in society back then. Because even today, we're here in 2020, social media is still a relatively nascent space. It's been around for 15 years or so, and it's taken on a completely different complexion now that there's a lot of paid advertising components to it. But I've been really in this space since the beginning. Well, since 2008, so almost the beginning. If you consider that I was actually had a job that featured social media prominently only 4 or 5 years after Facebook became an actual company. So I'm probably one of the first generation of people out there that has worked in the social media space officially. So there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me, that were as senior as me. And most of the people that were as senior as me, most of their experience was in things like television commercials. So I definitely was appealing to him from that perspective.
That's pretty nuts.
That's wild. Okay, so I know a lot of people probably want to be like, okay, what is it like working with him? Even that first time you met him, were you like a starstruck, kid, or was it just like it wasn't a big deal?
Well, I mean, he was famous, but not nearly as famous as he is now. I've kind of watched his popularity and fame rise since I came to the company. He had a couple of books under his belt, and he was writing another book at the time. But there was a period between 2012 and 2014, 2015, where he really wasn't putting out a lot of content like he is today. He was more focused on being an operator of a company. So I got to meet him as more Gary Vaynerchuk, the person, versus Gary Vee, the brand. And that's what that's kind of when I fell in love with the human behind the brand, and what attracted me to working at a place like VaynerMedia, where, it's very values-based, it's very principled, and, you can kind of feel like it's a next generation of company. So, that first time working with him wasn't as kind of probably nerve-wracking as one might expect, or it might not be. And, it might be way more nerve-wracking for somebody coming in 2020 who never met him. But back in 2014, it was just like working with like a senior guy, like a CEO at a company. Sure, that can be nerve-wracking. You got to be on your toes, but it wasn't. I've been around people like Scott Keogh prior to that, who was the CMO of Audi of America, who's now the CEO of Volkswagen Group. So I've been around senior people in my life. It wasn't that crazy.
That's cool.
How'd you end up? Obviously, you ended up. I know we talked last week. You ended up running a team of 75. What was the transitional period, and how'd you get picked for that role? Like you just kind of grew up with it, and how did it happen?
Well, it's actually, and that number kind of like waffles. And when I Monday morning quarterback my career, that number goes between 65 and 95. I'm not exactly sure, because I don't sit around counting how many people are on my team. but it kind of happened just by, growth and happenstance. When I got to Vayner, my team wasn't nearly that large. I think Gary gave me 3 portfolios to manage. The largest one at the time was Hasbro, and that was maybe 20 people. I had a small little team on AB InBev, which is the parent company of Budweiser and Stella Artois and Bud Light. That team was maybe 5 or 6. And then I was also managing a small team on the financial side of GE, so GE Capital. And there was probably another, 5 people on that team. Eventually, the AB InBev business, the growth that we were experiencing in the first couple of years became so much that I had to kind of jettison off some of the other pieces of business like Hasbro to really focus on AB InBev. And then we just went on a winning streak and won a bunch of brands over the course of about, say, 2.5 years. We grew from 1 brand to 16, and we were doing, originally we were only doing a few $100,000 on AB InBev, but at its height, we were probably doing, double-digit millions of dollars on those brands across the 16s. So it just became much more massive, and we went through a massive growth spurt. And one of the weird things and things I love most about VaynerX as a company is when we were experiencing some downtimes, probably about a year into my existence on VaynerMedia, where the Hasbro business, and this is after I had already kind of left it and kind of started focusing on AB InBev, but the relationship between our company and Hasbro, it started to kind of wind down a little bit. And we were getting ready to lose all of that business, which had 20 people assigned to it. But because I had some exposure and experience with a lot of the good people on that portfolio across creative teams, account service teams, stuff like that, and because Gary is such a human first person from a CEO perspective, our first thought wasn't to go through layoffs when we lost a couple $1 million piece of business. Our first thought was to try to find those people new homes. And because AB InBev was growing so fast, I was able to absorb, 20 or 30 people in 2 quarters when I needed to go out and hire 20 or 30 people. So I was able to create that kind of runway to growth where we were able to recognize the pace of growth that we needed to achieve in order to do the work that we promised the AB InBev clients we were going to do. So there would have been no other way to onboard that many brands in that short of a period of time had I not had some exposure and experience to the Hasbro team and had some place to put those folks, a friendly little exit from that portfolio over here. So we probably went from, I think what I had like 20 or 30 people across 3 portfolios to down to 65 people on just AB InBev by like 2016, I want to say. And then it really started to get aggressive in terms of how many people I was looking after. And it wasn't necessarily just me looking after them. I had other leaders from other disciplines like creative and project management helping kind of run the ship there. But that whole pod of humans got up to probably in that 75 plus range when we started to acquire other portfolios into the mix like Comcast and Mondelez. And so it grew through acquisition towards the later years. So it was kind of hyper growth at first, and then we started adding in, acquisition pieces down the road.
So that human first piece that you mentioned with Gary, how has he been able to duplicate that mindset within his own leadership? Because just hearing the way you talk, that's obviously something that you do as well, human first, just the way you've talked about your team and conversations with us. Can you kind of pinpoint how what's the strategy that he uses, besides example, or is it just example that he, duplicates that mindset within his leadership?
Well, I think, we're all like adults when it comes to how we consume content, and most of us, we're in a unique experience because we never really had celebrity CEOs. And it's kind of a unique position that we're in when, you wake up in the morning and where you get your news is from your boss, it's not all that common, but it's kind of fascinating. I'm a student of advertising. I went to school for advertising and marketing. I studied David Ogilvy and some of these other guys. And I'm very much am very self-aware of the moment in time that we're going through and understanding that my boss for the better part of a decade is one of these people that other people are going to write books about down the road. So when he speaks, you kind of listen. He just has that kind of magnetic personality. And one of the things he talks about when he gives life advice to not just us, but other CEOs, I mean, that's part of the beauty of it. He's communicating to the world. The world is his megaphone, and he's telling everybody that, the people that are going to win are not going to be the a-holes that show up and, don't care about people. The people that win are going to be the people that bring the humanity out. And so that's at the core of his message every day, everywhere you look. So you start to think about it. Not that, I hadn't thought about those things prior. I don't think I would have been in his organization if that wasn't the type of person I was, to some extent, like attracts like. He likes people that like people. So when he's out there hiring people, that's one of the core things he looks for. But yeah, I mean, we wake up every day and we're reminded of the fact that the reason we're here isn't because we're the smartest people in the room. The reason we're here is because we help scale his vision.
Love it.
Yeah, that's cool. And now, obviously, you moved on to the Sasha Group.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and could you just explain for anybody that doesn't know what that is? What's the difference between Sasha Group and VaynerMedia?
Sure. So it's very similar in the sense that we have an agency component to our business, but it's different in the sense that what you see kind of up front in us is more of a consultancy. So we're still very digital, social centric. That's how we were born. That's most of the people that work at Sasha Group came from VaynerMedia. So it's still very digital and social media centric because that's the universe of marketing that we believe in the most. But we're consultants in the front, and it's more of like an agency in the back. So you as you would expect when you're organized and architected in that way, we're just more adept at working on project-based scopes than necessarily like annual retainers. It doesn't mean we won't work on annual basis or a monthly retainer basis. We can build an integrated team the same way VaynerMedia can because we have a lot of the same disciplines when it comes to creative and project management, client service, all that kind of stuff. But that's not the only route we like to go, and that's very much so what VaynerMedia does. So we like to kind of get out there and earn your business up front and then continue to keep earning it over time. And we're perfectly comfortable going project to project, whereas, and not to say Vayner wouldn't be, but Vayner's focus is a little bit more squarely on Fortune 500, Fortune 100 brands. So in general, we're just trying to figure out a model that's more attractive to small to mid-sized businesses. So, companies that are doing annual revenues between $1 million and $250 million, which is, the lion's share of most companies out there.
Yeah.
The small guys.
If you were just to kind of roll with that topic, if you were to give some free advice or some consulting advice, right? What would you recommend a business, within that range should do marketing wise? Do you have any, strategy or tips that you would give? Obviously besides, working with the Sasha Group, how do you guys help scale a business that's at $1 million?
Well, I think first and foremost, it kind of depends on what industry you're in. So like, it's completely different if you're in B2B world and you're, selling services to other businesses, or if you're selling, kombucha to grocery stores, right? Like it's apples and oranges. So I'd say on the product side, if the type of business you have is a product, then figure out at any cost how to sell more product online, right? Don't be as reliant upon retail distribution as you once were. Obviously right now, especially for packaged goods companies that have heavy distribution into grocery stores and convenience chains, they're a little bit more insulated from the pandemic than most other industries are. So they're still not doing, awfully. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in the future, consumer behavior is not going to change and continue to increase more into the world of e-commerce. So figuring out how to sell stuff online and how to build your DTC channel don't stop worrying as much about it being a conflict with your retail partners. Like, that day has come. All the retailers are starting to understand that for brands to compete and for brands to exist in the year 2025, they're going to have to compete with those brands. So that's on the more on the package side of things. Similarly, but in a little bit of a different form, I'm doing that right now, right? If you think about what I'm doing, building the Sasha Group on the West Coast from day one with no revenue, no clients, no employees.
You show the business card. Come on, it's awesome. Such a great story.
Does he have it on?
Yeah, so I'm doing the same thing, right? I came out here, I'm starting up with nothing, and a pandemic hit. So I had to like climb my way out of the gutter and go out and earn some business and earn some employees and earn some revenue. But that kind of starts with expanding your horizons of what you view business to business sales as, right? You don't have to think about being on Zoom calls as like a death sentence, right? You can think about technology as a tool within your arsenal to help you beat out your competition. And so the people that become more comfortable with the new normal are probably going to win in the future. So keep that in mind as a business is what I would recommend.
That's really cool. I saw. I'm sure you probably saw the news today. I just saw this one that Gary, MT Wines got acquired by another brand, and that just goes to show exactly what you were just saying. going heavy online and getting the old school guys to kind of take notice of what Gary's doing, obviously online. So really, really cool stuff. And
what do you think of that?
It's great. I know all the parties that are involved in that from. I'm happy for my friends.
Yeah, sure. Very cool.
Love it. I was going to say, now you are in the process of kind of building something from scratch out there on the West Coast, and you're putting a team together. I do want, because we have a lot of listeners that, number one, are kind of looking at your career and saying, okay, how could I climb the ranks and become a success in an organization that I love and admire? If we could just kind of start from the beginning, like mindset from somebody starting from scratch, or maybe somebody starting within a team, maybe by you kind of telling us what you're looking for. Like when you bring somebody on, and you mentioned already people that like people, I really love that. But what are you essentially looking for in a partner, or a new employee or a team member?
Well, for me, I'm usually a little bit of an anomaly in the advertising world, because I like to think about things far into the future. So I've always been a very goal-oriented person, and somebody that looks at the future with some sort of like vision in mind, like how are things going to wind up being, is important to me. So that's typically why I like to work at a company that's owned by somebody like Gary, because I think we're always kind of striving for what the best of the future is going to be. So when working with me, there's a little bit of a, sense of I can have a tendency to be very high level and kind of have my head in the clouds and be a bit of a dreamer. So I look for kind of two things. I like a fair balance of people that are similar to me, right? Like people that can share in the visions that I have for what we're going to try to grow. But I also look for people that can keep me grounded and keep me on task. And I've always tried to run a balanced team that has a little bit of both things, so that even though we're pacing along trying to achieve our dreams on the macro, we're not letting anything fall through the cracks on the micro. So I'll go out and I'll look for people that are very project management, task oriented in nature, to kind of balance me out. But I also like to have that partnership component as well. And even for the people that I think aren't necessarily like for like with me in terms of personality, I try to treat as many people as I come in contact with as if we are partners in business. So it's a little different because we don't own any piece of Sasha Group or VaynerX, so we're not sharing equity, but we're all sharing in the success that we're achieving together. So it's really kind of that. It's a little bit of that vibe that I get from people of like, are they going to come to work every day feeling like we're building something, is kind of what I like to do.
Any things right off the bat you could say like automatically disqualify someone?
I don't know. I think like people that are, I don't necessarily love talking to people that are super close-minded or, have very, very strong opinions that it cloud their judgment too much. So when I have conversations and I'm asking people questions, if there's like a visceral reaction to something that I say about, any of the topics of the day or, what's going on out in society or something that's happening strategically from a brand perspective, I'm a very kind of middle of the road guy when it comes to personality and when it comes to like temperament. So you're never going to really catch me getting like very high or very low on any given day or given circumstance. And one thing that I can find is when people can allow their emotions to be too volatile, that can hurt business in some instances. It can hurt team dynamics as well. So I like, making sure that people can kind of control, not necessarily, censor themselves. Like I don't want people to censor themselves or their beliefs and what they care about. But I also want to make sure that they're open-minded and respectful to all dynamics. So if I sense there's going to be any issue there, that might be a red flag for me. Being at peace with myself and what I've done in my life, from a personal to professional perspective, that helps me, really kind of help bring other people along and share advice and mentorship, because at the end of the day, my sensibility is that everything is usually pretty okay, so despite how bad things can get, we're all very fortunate, and things could be way worse than they are. That's typically my general line in the sand approach to most things. And that's kind of what brings.
Very optimistic.
Well, I mean, I think it brings gratitude out. And I think when you have gratitude towards things in life, it's one of those things that people tend to resonate with. They like the experience of talking to you or interacting with you because they realize that you appreciate them,
I love that. Ace used to have a saying, a problem's not a problem until it becomes a problem. And then it's still not a problem. And I would always say, no, it's definitely a problem.
So many people, get so worried and focus so much attention on something that never even develops into anything. It's like you just don't have time for that,
Yeah.
So
it's kind of nuts. Like I deal with that all the time when you're dealing with a lot of employees or when you're dealing with people in your personal life. And this comes through a lot when I deal with some folks when they give me these elaborate stories about how wronged they think somebody has been to them or what injustice has been done to them. I tend to kind of like parrot those scenarios back to people. And when I get down to it, I'm like, so you mean to tell me that there's this other person that did X, Y, and Z to you, and in the case of business, let's say it's a business scenario. So your boss did X, Y, and Z, and it seems like they're really out to get you. And they're like, yeah, isn't that crazy? Isn't that messed up? Well, but like, you're pretty senior and you probably make a good fair amount of money, and this person hired you. So why again would they then spend all their time trying to ruin you in your resume? When they're paying you so much money and they rely on you to do your job for the whole ecosystem to work, that seems a little bit off base to me. And so usually when I parrot that information back to people, they realize that, oh, hey, there's some crazy insecurity inside of me that is eroding a specific part of my brain that allows me to be level-headed and have a more even keel sensibility about the matters. The fact of the matter is that people aren't out trying to ruin you. And it's, and I don't know if this is a real philosophy or not, but I've heard something about the egocentric mentality, which is kind of putting yourself at the center and like everything rotates around you. I feel like if you allow yourself to believe that all these people out there have it out to get you, even though you're playing the victim in that circumstance, you're still putting yourself at the center and having everything rotate around you, right? But the world doesn't work that way. Chances are most people aren't thinking about you every minute of every day, trying to figure out how to ruin you. it's just not how it is. So once
That
you
right
realize,
there, that was the podcast right there.
The golden nugget. The golden nugget right there.
but then you just have to realize how small and insignificant you are in the grand design of the universe. And once you start to think that way, like, okay, yeah, my life isn't that bad. Like, like people aren't out there trying to get me. So let's move on to the next topic,
Well, I think maybe I needed to hear that too. The world doesn't revolve around me.
That's great.
It's the first time I've heard that.
That's powerful. That's powerful
really
right there.
cool. I love it.
Well, Joe, shifting gears, just
I'm not trying to be mean to people. That's not the intent. I'm not trying to say nobody matters. Everybody matters, but I think we need to continuously tell ourselves that. The reason I can chill so much is because I realize I'm not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. So most people should try to think about how to knock themselves down a peg. It'll make you feel better, surprisingly.
Joe, shifting gears, bringing it back to like a little ways back, just thinking something you said earlier, and I'm just thinking about it now. I mean, when you were coming out of high school and social media and Facebook being so early at that time, like, how did you know, like, you couldn't have grown up saying, hey, I want to be a CMO of a company, right? Or maybe you did, I don't know.
Well, I didn't. So coming out of high school, I completely lacked motivation and energy and drive. I took 3 years off between high school and college because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't really have any money to go to school, so I didn't want to take out loans and all that jazz to study something I didn't care about. So I worked for a little while. I worked as a staff accountant at an IT firm, just learning about financial math and all that kind of stuff, and accounts payable, accounts receivable, balance sheets, all that jazz. And but I was not a very happy human. I was, drinking probably too much. I was extremely overweight. I think I weighed 300 pounds, which is probably 120 pounds more than what I should have been weighing. And I eventually, just kind of, at that point, I decided to do something about it and just kind of pick myself off the mat a little bit. So I started running every day, and I lost a ton of weight, like 140 pounds over, a year or two time.
Wait. So you go from being unmotivated, drinking a lot, miserable at your job, to now being 300 pounds and deciding you're going to lose the weight. Like, was it like every day for a year you're like, I got to lose the weight, and then finally one day you did it?
Nailed it exactly. I came up with a goal, and it was just, I didn't care. It wasn't a deliverables based goal. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to lose all this weight, right? Like, that would have been a fool's errand. I decided I'm going to go running every day for 100 days. And so I made the goal about something other than the weight, which was just do something you can actually achieve theoretically, right? So I made it about 100 days, and didn't matter how long it was. Like, it could have been 5 feet or 5 miles. Like, the goal was not how far, it was not how long it was going to take. It was just about 100 days. Make a goal, stick to it, see it through. So I did that, but I not only did that, but what I wound up going something like 400 or 450 straight days or something like that. And the weight flew off. Like, what I found was that, like, when you're not intended to be that size, the fat just kind of melts away. Like, once you get, pointed in the right direction and you're doing the right things, I didn't even really diet all that much. I think the one thing I did to alter my diet was I stopped consuming cheese, but then I just ran every day. And then an interesting thing happened from there. I was obsessed with this notion of, like, putting my mind to something and seeing the effects of my effort and energy. So that's when goal setting became a big part of my life. And then I set my sights on, when I was 21 years old, I set my sights on doing something very similar for my career. Now that I saw that putting my mind to something, I could accomplish it. I decided, well, what do I want to do with the rest of my days? and that's when I spent a lot of time reflecting on what makes me happy and where do I receive energy from. And one of the things that kind of was a consistent theme throughout those days when I was, like, running and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, I kept landing on brands. It was weird. I don't know what kept drawing me to that space, but I think it was because my dad and most of the people in my family, to that matter, are collectors. They view everything as a chance to be a collectible. So, and that went from cars to anything like baseball cards, right? My dad used to collect, Mustangs, and I think he had a couple Corvettes. My uncle used to collect Porsches, but like old ones, and they would restore them and stuff like that. My dad even had a random collection of Coca-Cola refrigerators. He would go to junkyards and garage sales and buy old used refrigerators and restore them. It was so super random. Like we should have had our own HGTV show. And so I started thinking about that, and then I started thinking about the psychology behind what makes brands important to people, and that's kind of what started my love affair with advertising. And when I did more research on it, I was trying to figure out what kind of person I am and what kinds of things I wanted to do, and I landed on chief marketing officer, funny enough, when I was 21 years old as a goal. And I was like, well, what is it about this role? I think it was, I liked it because it was the head of the marketing operation, and it was a person that got to make decisions. It wasn't something that was, reliant upon, going and getting like a portfolio school certificate where I could be the design lead or anything like that. I didn't necessarily trust my artistic skills. So I could be creative, but I didn't have to be creative. and that's what I kind of liked about it. So then, I flew through the college system in a few years, and then I got my master's degree. And by the end of my 20s, I was, in my career, and social media happened along that path. Like it didn't happen when I was in high school. Social media kind of happened in my 20s when I was in college and grad school. And, it was a very big part, like Facebook and MySpace were a huge part of college life in the early to mid 2000s. Like I wouldn't have had as many friends as I did if it wasn't for those platforms. So when I got out of grad school, it was, all those platforms were something I was using kind of inherently. And I never would have thought I would pursue a career in that space. But I think once I got my first assignment from Scott Keogh was to do some research on social media. And eventually he asked me to help him write a strategy to bring it to market for Audi. And that's kind of what got me started down the pathway, was just, hey, I got an assignment. I didn't know whether or not it was going to be a real thing, but throughout the process, I noticed that some brands were putting real money behind this. And that kind of got me started. And then I just never looked back. Once I had to eventually make a decision after I had written that strategy, and we were putting Audi on its way to becoming a brand that had a practice in social media. I was getting ready to propose to my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and she was living in New York working in fashion. And that's kind of what I think sparked the interest in a long-term career in social media, because I had to think about at that time what I wanted to do next. And at the time, my options were kind of threefold. Go to the client side now, get a job, working at some brand somewhere in the marketing department. Go to a traditional ad agency, because there was way more of them out there, like doing TV spots, print magazine ads, stuff like that. Because now I had a little bit of experience in that world, having worked at Venables Bell and Partners. Or find a small social shop. There was very few of them, and it was much more of an upstart scenario situation. But I chose that path because I had a hunch that 10, 15 years from that point, budgets were going to be much more tilted towards social media than things like TV. So I went to a small social media agency because I knew the future was going to be more heavily tilted budget-wise towards those things, and that would help me out long-term if I wanted to be a CMO. But I would also be able to get the education I needed, right? Because if you were going to the client side, there was no education. You'd have to hire an agency, and they were going to do everything for you. If you go to traditional agency, it takes 15 years to become a VP. I went to a social media agency, became one of 3. And I got a lot of education. Everybody around me all day long was living, breathing, eating, sleeping social media. So I think I made the right choice, and my career kind of reflects that massive growth in a very short amount of time.
That's insane. So what does your intuition tell you now? Because you had pretty good intuition back then. Where's media going?
I've always been a big fan of video. Number one, that's also fueled a lot of my success inside of VaynerMedia. But if I were to think about kind of, I don't know, I'll put 10, 15 years out in the horizon in front of me right now, like I like to do sometimes. I'd say more. It still sounds pretty far off to most people, but I wouldn't sleep on virtual reality. Anything that alters reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, things like that. The pandemic is kind of showing us that one of the things that we don't really have a firm grip on as a society is the effects of globalization, right? Pandemic might not have ever happened had we not been such a global, society, humanity. And think about it, we're in the year 2020. We've existed as a species for, I don't know how many thousands of years, and we've never had a pandemic this size and scale before. We've had plagues and stuff like that. But the reason why it's so far and wide and why every single human on Earth is impacted by it is because we are such a global society. And we get on flights all the time to do business in random cities, and we wake up in these places to do business and spread commerce around the world. And I'm not saying that should stop. We can't necessarily stop globalization, but we have to rethink what we're doing, right? Because we're not only putting ourselves in harm's way and in allowing the spread of viruses to happen more frequently, we're also tearing up our planet in the process. So things like what we're doing right now, I think, are going to be much more the norm in the future, right? Like we have to rethink what being in person with other humans actually is. So I think things like Zoom, things like Google Meet are only going to continue to skyrocket in prevalence and in prominence. Telecommuting and working from home is going to become a massive foothold in society. It's going to become more of a way of life. I think of people that, are having such a tough time finding a job right now. It's only really because most hiring managers and most companies haven't caught up to the realization that you don't have to work in these same towns as where the jobs are being offered. I think you're going to see much more of a movement in society where, you might live in Queens, New York, but your job might be in Portland, Oregon, because you're a shoe designer, but you don't want to live on the West Coast. You want to live on the East Coast. And that's okay. And you can do this, you can do just as much good, traveling 20% of your time and making your travel destinations to your headquarter campus once or twice a month. You're not going to see necessarily a drop off in productivity as you would have expected maybe 6 to 9 months ago when you had to have everybody on the same campus because you wanted to create this massive culture. So I think businesses are going to have to figure out what online culture looks like. But I think anything that alters reality is going to be the norm. So, take Gary Vee, for instance, and he'll probably hate me for saying this because I don't know if this is what he wants to have happen. But he could be the first person that takes hologram technology to the masses, because maybe he wants to, get paid his big speaker fee to zap his likeness or image into a conference room in Asia versus actually getting on a plane and going there, right? Like that would be a lot better for all of our sanity in terms of and health and well-being, instead of getting on a plane and absorbing all the carbon emissions and having to wear a mask and do all that nonsense. It would be a lot better if we all embrace these technologies and we're able to see them as they scale. I've worked in alcohol for a while. I worked at beer for a long time at Vayner. And one of the things that I work in wine and I work on a kombucha and tea and all that kind of stuff. One thing that's been pretty interesting to me is the impact on the restaurant industry, and seeing that hits home for me because I have a sister and brother-in-law that own restaurants. But I can't stop thinking about this idea of technology bringing us together across long distances. So, what's to stop us from throwing a headset on and meeting up with your old college roommate in a bar in your college town without actually being in the same city? Like, why can't I go have a beer with my best friend from college and me being in California and him being in Virginia? Like that is a reality. That will be a reality very soon in the next 10 years. So who's going to go buy up that beachfront property in that space? Who's going to go and figure out how to create the virtual bar, how to create the virtual hotel? If you want to go have a great experience with your family, like, in the future, you may think more about how to augment your reality and just experience being in a hotel that's like 5-star hotel than actually being in one. Like you might, I don't know. It sounds crazy, but like that's reality.
But definitely true. Definitely true. I mean, one thing I was just thinking when you said it was because of everything being through video and the job market obviously changing right now as we speak over these last couple of months. I was just thinking about like how much more competitive it may or may not be with people in other countries competing for the market, right? You know, as far as like positions, right? As far as like outsourcing, the way people outsource like manufacturing jobs now, let's say China, India, and other places. Do you see maybe that turning into a trend maybe for the future for other jobs since everything's through video or maybe on the creative piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now you're already starting to see some companies prop up that create not flawless solutions, but pretty decent solutions to solving production, right? Where you can do fully remote productions where you're sending a product into the production house and you're getting on something like a Zoom or a FaceTime and you're being, directed through a sequence of events completely online. So I think there will be more businesses that start to crop up. I mean, this is not, to me, it's not unexpected, right? Every time you have a recession, some good comes out of it. A lot of good comes out of it. A lot of businesses are born in like Phoenix coming out of the ashes. So you kind of need a recession every once in a while to reset everything and get some innovation in place. So I think some really cool things are going to be on the horizon. And yeah, sure, productions are going to be one of those things. But even the way we have, this is going to sound crazy, but even consuming entertainment, things like NFL football, right? Like that's more money than either any person on this call right now can even imagine is at stake for those guys and the NFL teams and the franchises and pulling that off in the right way. But what's to actually stop them from, altering the reality of the television viewing experience instead of having 100,000 people in the stadium and having it feel like it's like some big important game that way. I make this example because I'm a big Washington fan. What if you stripped out the audience from the television viewing experience and put the old stadium's fans in it, right? Which is a beloved stadium to the Washington fans. That would be a much better viewing experience than seeing, 5,000 people in a 100,000 person stadium. And with video gaming technology the way it is right now, why wouldn't the NFL be consulting with Madden or one of those video game companies that makes it look so real? Like you can easily take the fans out of the stadium. I think. I say easily. I'm not a developer, so it's probably not that easy. My guess is
Take
I think
hands and they do it.
It would be pretty easy to a technology-minded company to fool the viewing experience, to basically take somebody like me who, you could probably dupe me pretty easily. You put a fake crowd in there and I would not be any the wiser,
Oh, it's insane. So what's really cool for anyone who is trying to come up with the best remote work from home argument, you guys all heard it here. That was by far. Companies need to embrace it. I need to work remote from now on. That's awesome. I love it, but it's so true. Businesses were forced to make changes, and a lot of industries that have kind of fought technology are now in a situation where they're like, wow, technology is making my life easier. I'm saving money on travel expenses. I'm getting no-showed. Think about all the service-based industries that book appointments and get no-showed, where now they can double book themselves and it doesn't matter because you don't have to leave your home if somebody doesn't show up,
People always think of it as a downfall or a bad thing. And like, trust me, I'm right in there with you when I'm like at my wit's end because my kids are home and they're not in school. And like, I'm trying to have a Zoom conference while my kids are like bouncing up and down and jumping all over me. It's frustrating and it's stressful, but like, you got to remember that that's not going to be every day for the rest of all time. Like that's here today. It's probably not going to be gone tomorrow since some of the news has been coming out about childcare, but if you kind of think about what life would be like, at its height, like what are the benefits of this happening to me right now? How can we use this to our advantage? you got to get through the stages of grief, and that's something that everybody has to grapple with. But like, the sooner you can go through the stages of grief and get to the acceptance part where you're like, okay, this is what it is now, like, what do I do about it? The sooner you can get to that stage, the more competitive your business will be.
So speaking of that, you talk a lot about gratitude and appreciation. I love the fact that, we've had past conversation. You were very open about your faith. Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Because I thought your story was pretty powerful. I'll let you tell it. But how you kind of came to, because it wasn't the normal, hit rock bottom situation, that you started to live a more faith-filled existence. What was that process kind of like for you?
Well, I think it's probably similar to what a lot of people go through. I've already told you about life in my 20s, and kind of going through the weight loss experience and getting ambitious and going through a phase where, I was going through school and then getting out of school, and I've told you most about my 30s. But what I haven't really talked about more is the end of my 30s and into my 40s, when we started having kids, which kind of coincides pretty neatly, with my experience at VaynerMedia, because when I got hired by Gary, 3 months in, probably 90 days into the job, I found out that my wife was pregnant with our first child, and she's 5 now. And we're actually expecting our third child. But when that event happened and we brought Edith into the world, me and my wife started thinking a little bit about, how are we going to raise our children, which, everybody tends to do. And even though I wasn't like hyper religious, I grew up Catholic and she grew up Baptist. Didn't really practice, didn't go to church for the most part for 15, 20 years. It wasn't really a big part of my life. It was also not really that big of my parents' life. They were Catholics in name, they went to church, but I think it was really my grandma that made them go to church. So we grew up in the church, but like, it wasn't really that big of a deal. Like, my parents made me go to like CCD, and I went to church every Sunday. But like, as soon as I got to college, I was not attending church anymore. And then when I started having kids, me and my wife were thinking about it. And we're like, well, maybe we should try going to church, because the one thing that I enjoyed about what my parents had done, even though they weren't like massive practitioners, was they put me in the environment for me to make up my own mind. And I think what that did was it gave me like a base level grounding in morality. Like I was around the Bible enough, and I was around people that were practicing Christians to kind of know what was right and wrong. And so I kind of started thinking, hey, we should probably do that, base level, let's do that. But we were also very open-minded about where we went to church, because we were living in Long Island City. And like, if you know Long Island City, it's not like, it's a great place, but there's not a lot of churches in Long Island City. There's like an old rundown Catholic church that I think is predominantly Spanish speaking. And then there's like a Baptist church that meets in a elementary school every Sunday. And that was like 2 buildings over from where we lived. And so we were like, all right, they're offering free childcare. Let's just go there.
Win.
So I went there, and it was like a completely different experience than what I'm used to. I'm used to like a more conservative environment with like where the sacraments are all practiced and they're doing communion and like they've got the frankincense going and all that stuff. But you go into this other place and it's like, they've got guitars plugged into amps and there's PowerPoints on the screen, and they're talking about, they basically play music for half of it, and it's all like new wave Christian music. And then 30 minutes in, the pastor gets up there, talks for 15 minutes, you're done, right? I thought, hey, this is kind of neat and interesting. And it was a different exposure for me. Like, I had never experienced people that were interacting with stories from the Bible that way. And I think that just kind of caught my interest, piqued my interest. And I'd say over the past, like, that was like circa 2015, 2014, 2015-ish when my daughter was born till now, we started getting back into church. And then when we moved out here to California, we found a different church. It's Presbyterian. So now, I'm a Presbyterian deacon. I don't know. I just, for some reason, I started getting more into the message, because I was seeing the message in a different light. And I just started becoming more of a believer. And I think I would consider myself like a Christian for the first time, like seriously, like where it's like rooted in my beliefs, not just like I'm a passing, agnostic person that, kind of went to church because I thought it was a good idea. I consider myself a believer. And I'd say that's more of a revelation. That's been more the past like 2 or 3 years. And the effect that it's had on me is, I've always believed I was a nice person, and I always believed that I have the right temperament to help people out, but I've been called more to actually put that into practice. And so some of the things that I think I've been trying to do that God's been telling me to do are just, check in on people. And, one of the things that I did about a year ago was I put a message out on LinkedIn, because everywhere I look on LinkedIn, you've got people that are crushing it, right? And that was, that's all people talk about is how well they're doing or how much they're crushing it and stuff like that. And I just had a hunch. I was like, I wonder if that's really true. Mental health is like a big deal, and it affects so many people out there. Not everybody on this platform can be crushing it. And so I just put out a little bit of a note to people. It was text only message on LinkedIn. And I was like, hey, I know everybody's crushing it. But by off chance, if there's somebody out there that's not crushing it and needs somebody to talk to, my DMs are open. Feel free to hit me up. And I was overwhelmed at the amount of response I got. I think there was, dozens, if not close to 100 people that responded to me directly and were thanking me for making that overture, and then taking me up on the offer to spill the beans on kind of what they were going through. And I don't pretend, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm a willing ear, and I'm willing to help people, especially people that look and sound and have similar experiences and backgrounds to me. People that are on LinkedIn usually fit that description. And they confided in me a lot of things that were, giving them anxiety. And I would try it for maybe 3 months. After that, I would, 3 or 4 days a week, both ways, into and out of work on my commutes, I would spend time talking to people on the phone and just hearing about, what's going on in their lives, and offering any kind of help I can. And so I've just been trying to figure out ways to do that more, where I can connect with people and kind of share myself. When I think about service, I now think about service in 3 different ways. So there's the traditional 2, which most people are familiar with. You can either help people through giving your time, like I could go ring the bell at the Salvation Army and try to collect money around the holidays, or build a house through Habitat for Humanity. That's me giving my time. I'm not necessarily particularly skilled in anything, but I have time to give. Here's my time, take it. Or I can give my money, right? I have money, you don't, here's some money, go do something with your charity. Or you can give yourself. And so what I look at that third part about is, God and Jesus teach us that we all have special gifts. So how do you recognize your talents, and how do you give that to other people, almost as a part of your own, spiritual well-being? Like my well-being is satisfied when I'm giving myself and my talents to other people. So it's very specific and minute. Like I'm not a home builder, so me working in Habitat builds every weekend is probably not going to be the best solution for anybody. I'm a marketer, I'm a brand person, I'm a social media specialist. How can I help people that are in similar walks to me, business people, whatever? How can I help people that are maybe struggling to go through things? Whether it's helping them find a job, whether it's just, listening to them, whatever it is, sharing my experiences. I feel like that's what I'm being called to do. And so that's a very long roundabout way of answering your question, but that's kind of where I'm at today. Work in progress.
Yeah, but powerful with a really awesome story. I mean, it's just so cool what you did on LinkedIn, because it's just, it just goes to show that anybody listening to this could do that today. And so many people just want to be heard, and they want to be able to connect and share their perspective of what they're going through. And the fact that you took the time to hear people out, I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Got we got to help people. I tried to do the same thing when the pandemic hit, because I was starting to get really worried about college graduates. They're entering into the worst job economy of all time. And here they were for 4 years thinking that life was going to be so great when they graduated, in for a rude awakening. So I've been trying to double down and help as many people out that either, are graduating in 2020, or people that, who may have lost their job due to the pandemic. If I see friends in distress that are like worried about things and, could use a little bit of help, I'll, whatever free time I have, I'll give it to you.
I love it. And any trending, let's say, advice that you've been giving, or things that you've kind of seen to be a common denominator in some of the anxiety that people are facing right now? If someone's listening and they're like, I'm going to DM Joe as soon as this is over, what is some advice that you'd give for people who are going through anxiety, stress? Maybe they're just so career driven and focused, they never pull their head up to look around them, relationships failing. What is some, quick advice that you could give?
We've kind of already touched on one of them, which is, it sounds counterintuitive, but try to force yourself. Like, one of the things I get asked kind of frequently is, well, what do I do next? And it's hard to answer that question unless you ask yourself, what do I want to do in general, right? Like, what's important to me? Where do I want to be in like 10 years, 15 years? Like, that's more important. It doesn't seem like it's more important, because that's not going to put a paycheck in your bank on a Friday. I like to look at those long-term planning initiatives as like the compass of your career, right? It guides you. It makes every short-term decision you make very easy, right? The reason I have made really good decisions throughout the course of my career is because I'm grounded in a long-term idea of what my personal satisfaction is, right? I've known since I was 21 years old what I want to do with my career, right? And so when I'm making decisions in the micro, when I have 3 different job options that I have to navigate, it's obvious to me which pathway to take, even if it means less money, or it means, whatever, or it means I'm farther away from a loved one, or, I'll make the decision that I think is right for what I want to do, that's going to make me happy for the long haul. And a lot of people just get caught in this vicious cycle where they always think that they'll find time later on to focus on the long term. But they keep delaying those goal-making events off, because they're always like, oh, well, next month I'll get to that. Next month I'll get to that. Stop putting it off. Like, you've got time right now. God's given you a gift of time right now. So figure out what you want to do to make you happy long term, and then that will make all of the decisions you need to make in the micro more easy to make. So it sounds like a little bit counterintuitive. I know it's hard for a lot of people to swallow, because they're like, well, shit, I just need money right now. But I promise you, if you go out and you just take whatever job will pay you, you're going to be miserable. And then it's going to create you're kicking the can down the road. There will be another, identity crisis 6 months from now, when you are in a job you hate and you can't leave because you feel trapped because the economy sucks. So that's one common piece of advice. But then I think the other one is what we talked about before, with like how people struggle with the perception of how other people view them, right? And I think at the root of that, beyond just like the egocentric modeling and stuff like that, the root of that, and what I would tell you, 9 times out of 10 is just like, don't worry about what other people think. It's not as important as you think it is. Like, I think life opens up for you more when you can trust your own instinct on who you are as a human, right? Like, who you are, what kind of person you are. If there's only good there, how can you be wrong? Like, how can you hate what somebody else thinks about you? Like, just put it in the background. Like, if you know who you are and it's all good, who cares what other people think? Like, who honestly cares?
I love that. So winding up, last thing, it just seems like Gary cares so much about, and he's always, I think, cared about helping people, but like the time that he's spending, like Tea with Gary Vee, the time that he's spending with people is just, I feel like he's changed so much in the way that his message is being delivered. And so when we talk about that whole hustle mentality, what are your your thoughts on that?
I think the thing that he was trying to really focus people in on is, the negative energy in your life. Like figure out who's bringing that to the forefront and cut that out of your life. It's not necessarily specific to a wife or a father or whatever, but in society, the most common tropes are, well, yeah, it's probably your mom or your brother or sister or your dad or your wife. They're the people that are getting in your ear the most, and they're the people that you typically want to please. And I think what he's trying to say is stop living to please other people. Like that's not going to be what makes you happy one day. And once you can get on that level where you're worried about pleasing yourself, like not in a selfish way, but just in a self-fulfillment way, like that's when, you'll unlock the happiness that I think he's unlocked. And, so I don't think it's as much about like any one specific person, and it's more about those negative forces in your life. If they really loved you, they would support you. So just figure that out, and then the back half of that was in the future, there aren't going to be CEOs that are not public facing. I think he's really at the forefront of a movement of what a lot of companies are going to be not forced to do, but what consumers are going to demand of their CEOs. So I think people that are in high places of business are going to have to get really comfortable with not just understanding the X's and O's of business strategy, but also understanding, the softer side of things when it comes to, really putting your company out there on the map when it comes to things like compassion and empathy. People don't want to buy products from companies that have asshole leaders. They just don't. They want to buy products from people that have, high-minded individuals at the helm that really understand, where they're at in terms of their place in the universe and what they can do to impact society. And that's been coming on for a while, but this next generation is the Gen Z generation is demanding it. Like everybody's being put on notice, and the best companies are going to be the ones that understand people. Like that's just it. It's like a human first, people focused organization is going to be the way of tomorrow.
Last thing, kids and technology, just super fast. How do you feel about your kids having cell phones, being on the phone? When you hear, parents say all he does is sit on his phone all day, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of torn on that, to be honest with you, because me and my wife aren't always on the same page with that. Like I think, limiting screen time I think is important, but also. It's especially in a pandemic, it's kind of a way of life. Your kids are going to have a little bit more screen time than you're comfortable with. But outside of a pandemic, I think technology is the great enabler, and it's the window into the way society is going to operate in the future. So I would spend less time worrying about how to block yourself from technology and getting your kids exposed to it, and figuring out more about, how to make sure they're looking at the right things, and make sure that make your lifestyle with your kids less about screen time and more about what can you do outside of screen time that's appealing and just as fun as screen time. Because if your life sucks outside of them looking at YouTube, then they can notice that. So try not to have a bad life outside of YouTube.
Good advice, Joe.
Awesome. How old do they have to be to have an Instagram or a TikTok account?
I don't even want to know. Well, I mean, they've got to be creating content. So, but I mean, I see it in my kids now. I see that they have the urge to, because they're always grabbing my phone and wanting to like take pictures of things, and they're doing performances for us and trying to act things out and trying to sing. They have dance parties in my bathroom. It's just, they're going to be on TikTok, I think, sooner than other platforms, because the interesting thing about like kids these days versus where I was when I was a kid, like when I was a kid, it was completely taboo to be dancing and singing and stuff like that. Like people were out playing baseball and soccer and like collecting baseball cards. Nobody was singing and dancing and stuff like that. But, you've had this past 20 years has been, American Idol and The Voice and all these things. And that's what the kids have grown up with in today's day and age. And now you've got platforms like TikTok where like literally the currency of the platform is dancing and singing. So I think that it's probably going to be sooner than I would imagine. I would imagine maybe getting up there to double digits, maybe like around 9, 10, they're going to start getting the itch to be creators and makers. and then I'll have to like just scratch a completely different parental itch than my parents have ever had to scratch.
Yeah.
Of how do I police my children from being famous on the internet.
Oh, we love it. Thank you so much for your time. You are awesome. I hope you'll come on the podcast again. But we really appreciate you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys.